All right, music fans, welcome back. It is Dave, the Real Music Observer, observing real music in real time for real people just like you, just like me. So, yesterday I spent some time again watching the Chicago documentary, which is on Netflix, when a music doc is on Netflix, it's really tempting. And Chicago is, or were, I mean, I guess they're still one of my favorite bands. I'm just not really keen on this new lineup they have and all the stuff that's gone on. And I've become more of a Peter Cetera fan through this, even though I've had some moments where I was really upset with Cetera for not reuniting with Chicago. But I'm watching the documentary, and there's a portion where they're talking about the 1980s and, music television and how they focus on a leader. They focus on, who's the leader of this group? And nobody's really the leader because it's a democracy and they've pledged and they've taken a blood oath and so forth. And they always focus on the lead singer. It's not like a big, they act like this is a big issue. Like, what are we going to do? They're going to focus on Peter. And Peter got himself in good shape and he's looking good and he's got some great songs and he's become the star. And okay, so I get the democracy thing. Peter Cetera has become the star, and you're upset about it. But, the guys in Aerosmith should have broken up years ago. Because Steven Tyler, he's kind of the star, right? I mean, Joe Perry's up there, but it's about Steven Tyler. Mick Jagger and the Stones. I mean, I don't know if people know who the heck Charlie Watts is. Okay, I mean maybe they do, but the point is, it's the front guy, the front man or woman, and it's bizarre how they're all like hand wringing, like oh. And then Peter became very popular, and David Foster, wrote these songs with Peter, and they rescued us from this malaise that we were in at the beginning of the decade, and Danny Seraphine, who later gets kicked to the curb because he probably recommended Foster, and they're resentful. And now it's the end of the decade, and Foster's gone, and they're thinking, okay, now let's get rid of Danny. We can use the whole, gee, he's not adapting to technology, and he can't play, and he's a lead drummer, he's not a rhythm drummer. And why did it work then for like 20 years, guys? How did it took you 20 years to figure out. And by the way, musical trends and tastes change. The way Danny plays wouldn't be a bad thing now, probably starting in 1993. Nobody would care about the click and all this stuff you were complaining about. And, Danny saw it coming more or less, but it's just a weird coincidence. And both Danny and Peter have stated that the documentary is more of a crockumentary. I just think the way they portrayed the 80s and who are we going to focus on, I think there was jealousy there. There was like, well, Peter's now the star, and Peter's demanding this, and Peter's demanding that, and they didn't like that. You know what? Here's the thing, if your star quarterback throws a bunch of touchdowns and has a great season, guess what? He's going to get paid more. His stock is going to go up. People are going to meet some of his demands in order to keep him on the team. It happens in sports. It happens in music. And Peter had come into his own songwriting with David Foster. And Foster and he could have collaborated again on Chicago 18. But they bring in Chef, who, he brought a couple of songs with him, but it was like Foster on his own, which wasn't as good as Foster and Cetera. It wasn't a good. And here's the other side to that. Yeah, Peter goes off and he's got the Foster tune and he's got Glory of Love, but then when Foster comes back to work on Chicago 18, Cetera is ticked off and boots Foster from the next album, and the next album isn't as strong without David Foster there. I think he had Patrick Leonard there, who did a nice job, but it wasn't David Foster. So it's very interesting to see all these dynamics at play. If they had just kept this team together and sucked it up. And I know it was tough for Robert Lamb, who was the creative force in the early days, but clearly this was the Mach 2 version of Chicago now. You don't have Terry on guitar jamming out. You don't have that anymore. You don't have this Hendrix guy in the band. You've got a different... You had Chris Pinnock. You had Donnie Dacus, who was more almost like a sort of a jazzy sounding guitar player. Really kind of nice, actually. I like Donnie, and I thought he was perfect for that whole late 70s no-tell lover kind of sounding stuff. Once we hit the 80s, they booted him because he missed a practice, or I don't know. He wasn't Terry, and I don't think you should have tried to replace Terry. I know you think Keith Howland is more like Terry now, but this is just for playing tribute music at this point. This isn't really to create anything new. But during the mid-80s, I think their reluctance to understand music videos, and you've got a leader, and your leader is Peter, and you let Peter lead, and then you give him what he wants, and then this band sticks together, you lose... I guess these guys just figured, hey, we got enough money, we can take a chance at losing him, we're gonna just cast him aside, bring Jason in, and look, Jason did well. I'm not going to bash on Jason here, but the trajectory was generally down. They had a smart producer in Ron Nevison who threw Bill Champlin out there, said, hey, we don't have a Cetera anymore, but we got a Bill Champlin, and we're going to throw Bill out there for Chicago 19, and Bill knocked it out of the park for 3 top 10 songs. Of course, Diane Warren and the whole we're not playing with horns anymore, and the horns are in, the horns are out. I think you could have had a happy medium and had horns. You could have had versions of the songs with the horns and without. There was a way to do this, and they decided to just cast it all aside. And in hindsight, I was probably wrong about my initial reaction, which was, I'm glad Chicago did this, because I think they would have had a much longer run. I think they could have even stayed on adult contemporary stations for most of the 1990s if it was Cetera and Chicago. I think both artists got weaker without one another. I think Chicago got weaker without Peter. I think Peter got weaker without Chicago. And if they had stuck together and kept Champlin there and maybe kept Foster for a much longer period of time, you may want to try a different producer. But my point is, if you'd kept that team together, I think the success would have been greater over a longer period of time. And it's just obvious that Chicago, I think, was a prideful band in the 80s. Peter Cetera may have been a diva, like people say, he's a diva, but he was their diva, and he was making them mucho dinero, okay? So that's my perspective now. Watching that documentary, I just see this as, well, we couldn't have Peter being a success, so we had to kick him out. We couldn't listen to Danny tell us what to do anymore because he helped revive the band, so we had to kick him out. And that's the way I see it now. So I'm done with this video. It took me a while to get this video together because it's just, there's so many thoughts about this, and I need to stop watching documentaries. For the Real Music Observer, I'm me, Dave, and I'll be back with more real music in real time for real people just like you, right there and just like me. We'll do it again real soon.